Want to welcome everybody back to the Fire and Feedback series with Whiskey Arms. I'm your host, Todd Langley, and we have a special guest tonight that I'm really proud and humbled to have been able to bring onto the program. So, Tony, thank you for being on here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me out here. This is great.
Yeah, it's wild how far we've come pretty quick. So it's very exciting. But for the viewing audience that doesn't know, this is Tony Hustedt-Mai, and Tony has a unique and varied background that I think is very important for public safety. And we've gotten to know each other over the summer till now. And I was like, man, we got to figure out if there's a way we can, tie this in and get you onto the program. So thanks again.
Yeah. Happy to do it. I love getting out and get some range time, get some good bourbon. Time well spent.
So speaking of, here's our official toast to say thank you. And what we did is, if you don't know, we've got some bourbon here. Oh, that's good.
It is very good.
And as a very good guest, which we're going to start as a precedent for anybody who comes on, you must now bring me gifts. Tony set the bar high. We have a lowball glass with Whiskey Arms on it. And you can see who's to May for Congress. So that'll give you a little flavor of what we're talking about tonight. It's going to be a good time. But to get into it, really, Tony talked about you having a unique background that I think is very important in the public safety. And it starts with your service to our country with the Navy, and then moving academic, and then moving into aspirations for politics with the legislation. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background so they understand who you are and where you're coming from?
I've never taken a simple path, or this path has never been provided simply. I enlisted after 9/11, ended up being an electronics technician on submarines. Not what I had initially intended, but people get that from the recruiters and everything all the time. Loved being a submariner. Still proud of my time in the submarine service. Got picked up for a commissioning program, so the Seaman Admiral program. Sent me to Purdue. Came to Purdue, fell in love with it. I was like, this is where I'm going to retire to. Did my undergrad in political science, and then Navy was like, cool, we're going to send you back to submarines, so we send you to nuclear power school. I'm like, okay, let's do this. So went to nuclear power school, went all the way through, got put on med hold after graduating because my shellfish allergy became submarine disqualifying. So was not pleased about it at the time, but after the fact, I'm very excited that I got to learn all of that, like engineering and science background. Came in strategically in so many cases I never would have decided to do it on my own, and it's been incredible leverage for getting things done. After that, I ended up getting redesignated for surface warfare. Not what I wanted to do, but I loved it. It was so much more fun. Driving ships and shooting guns, like, you really can't ask for a whole lot more out of like your naval career. So I did my first surface assignment was on a frigate as the anti-submarine warfare officer. We did a counter-narcotics deployment. So we were doing all the interventions, and we were chasing the submarine narcotics, which I would not get on board one of those submarines. They are not well constructed, but hey, I guess if you're getting paid a lot of money to do it, good on you. Then I went to my first destroyer. I was an anti-terrorism officer. That's really where I got into a lot more of the stuff that I love doing and was passionate about. Like that's what drove me into the military in the first place. It's like wanting to do counterterrorism work, protecting our country after watching it get attacked. Ended up doing some IAs, spending time on shore as well. And then I got picked up for a program called Fleet Scholar. So I thought the Navy was going to send me to go to Harvard and pay for my master's. And then I was told, hey, the list of 14, well, we didn't get the funding for everybody, so it's cut to 7. But hey, you're number 8 on the list. Not as as comforting as I guess they thought. But Purdue came in just incredibly well for me. And then so I came here with Purdue paying for my grad school. And so they took me not only for my master's, but PhD program as well, which wasn't on my radar beforehand, but it's like, hey, if you're going to support me and you want me to go do a PhD program as well, I'm going to deliver. So got to come back to Indiana, loved it even more, knew for a fact like this is where I was going to make home. Did my master's, knocked out all my PhD coursework and exams before I had to head back to the fleet. Another destroyer, I was weapons officer on Ramage, then went to the USS Stout as the plans and tactics officer, and then retired off of Stout because I was told you're never medically cleared to deploy again, which a little disappointing, but it is what it is, right? You have to play with the cards that you're dealt. So I retired, came home, got some spinal surgery last year, no longer hobbling around on a cane, which is great. No, I use it sometimes, but only if I have to walk long
Only on the
distances.
campaign trail.
I've avoided it so far, and so we've talked about it. Like when we're out knocking doors and everything, I'm like, if I'm walking, miles, I'm probably gonna have to break it out. But it is what it is. So retired, came back, finishing up my PhD in counterterrorism at Purdue. Started teaching as well, teaching a counterterrorism course that I put together. Loving life, right? Everything's fantastic. I have my 12-acre hobby farm, got my workshop, got an incredible wife that's like, I have no idea why she's hanging out with somebody like me, but I don't ever want her to ask that question. And so I'm like looking around, I spent like my entire adult life focused on like external challenges for our country. And so now I'm retired and back home and I'm looking around like we've got a lot of problems going on.
Yeah. I won't disagree with you on that at all. And we will talk about some of the specific threats and challenges, but do you mind explaining a little bit with what you're doing at Purdue? That might be a little bit of interest. I hear something about the Purdue Homeland Security Institute, and you're involved with that along with your studies. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what your relationship is with it?
Yeah, so I've kind of got at least a foot in the door for pretty much anything national security related. Normally comes across my desk or email to some extent. Purdue's Homeland Security Institute and their Military Research Institute, their director, amazing guy, does great things. Out in the community, out in industry. So I partner up with them quite a bit. I find interesting things like some of the stuff that CRLT wants to do, bring it over there, and you got a good, like private industry, educational institution, like collaboration. So there's a few projects, right, where we've talked about one, nuclear safety and security, which will likely be a big thing in the very near future, not just for Indiana, but across the country with the growing amount of companies that want to do small modular reactors. And then we've got kind of the integration program and training between local and like county and potentially regional, like tri-county areas, collaborating all of those resources, training them all together so they can have practice disaster response. Because as we've seen, for about a year now, FEMA is not coming anymore. Right? FEMA is hopefully going to write a check after the fact. But local areas are expected to operate on their own. It's not just, passing it down to the lower level and giving supervision like it was. It's the lower level has to respond. And if we're not prepared for it, people will literally die.
Yeah, the way I like to try to describe it is that a disaster response will start and finish with the community. So the first responders and the ability to respond to the incident, that's going to happen without any level of support other than what we've trained, equipped, and prepared for at the local level. And then, yeah, we might get some support from the regional level, and the federal level will come in behind that later. But then at the end of it, they're going to, at some point, close out and move away. And then even that longer term recovery is still going to go back to the local community. So something really big for what I'm advocating here within Whiskey Arms and my company. You mentioned crisis response leader training, CRLT. That's one of the things that's very passionate, for me and what we might do at Purdue. But it's all about what we do to bring it back to the community resiliency and the community recovery capabilities.
Yeah, and that's really what really locked me in. When we got introduced, and we sat down and talked through some things. Like, oh, you're dead set on the things that matter, right? That community resiliency and response is unbelievably critical to mitigating the immediate impact and casualties of an event, and then actually having that community be able to restore and recover after it. And a lot of that, it doesn't exist anymore, right? FEMA was the people that came in and did it and just told everybody what to do. So that skill set's gone, right? And without that, big brother telling us what to do, we're going to struggle a lot more, but that's really where it should be at, right? Local people know the situation better, right? Your county sheriff is going to know what's going on out, the county roads, the small overpass bridges over creeks and things like that. What is going to impinge any sort of, just traffic flow for response? FEMA's not going to know that. They're going to have some map or some little digital chart or whatever, and not understand what's actually going on, or there's this trail that comes back here. So even though this is knocked out, we can get around. Or hey, I know this says that there's like 6 people living in this home, but actually 3 of them are away at college, so we don't have to do a drone search and rescue looking for the other 3 sets of human remains that we expect there. Right? Local people are going to understand the specific details and the differences that will make in the response.
So there is definitely a whole spectrum of risks or specific threats, and we are living in, I wouldn't call them unprecedented time. I think we can go back in history and say, hey, yeah, there have been things like this in the past, but I think there's certainly a lot of potential of what can go wrong. As we talk about something specific out of that spectrum, let's talk about the power grid. Let's talk about what that means to our state. And can you talk a little bit about that energy requirement and some of the stuff you mentioned, what is an SMR and all of that? Can you fill us in on a little bit about that? And then really, I want to drive that back to, well, what does that mean towards community engagement, public safety, and emergency response? So I know that's a long-winded one, but that's really kind of what I was hoping to get to is let's talk a little bit about what that means to our state.
Right. So Indiana is already a power importer. And as other states are seeing their power demands come up, there's less power for Indiana to buy. Coupling that with our coal plants that are reaching the end of their service life, an aging grid, and some domestic factors that have made it more complicated for some power generation to bring in, and then a drive for like data centers, right? And everybody can point at data centers as being the evil thing in the room and causing all the power. But even if we kicked every data center out of the state, we're a few years away from not having enough power. And that's
like across the whole. What do you mean when you say that? What do you mean we're not going to have enough power?
It means we're going to have to not just deal with like massive rate hikes as the purchasing of power gets more competitive. We're going to have times where there's going to be planned blackouts, and then there's going to be periods where there's rolling brownouts. And I don't think anybody nowadays is comfortable living without energy, right?
Absolutely not.
We are far behind. I mean, I enjoy, especially during the summer. I'm not a hot weather person. I want that air conditioning. I'm going to be miserable. I'm going to be grumpy, and that's just like without even thinking about like, the food in the fridge and the freezer. Like, it's going to like significantly impact our way of life if these solutions are not put in place.
Well, what I think about, and maybe it's a little bit selfish on what I've seen since COVID, but we moved to a lot of medium-sized and small-size work went remote.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all at home doing work, or we're in a hybrid position. Now we go into a blackout, and my productivity, not just my food and everything else, but my livelihood, I can't communicate with anybody to do my work.
That's an incredible point. I was thinking about it from like the bottom tier of necessity. If you think about
which is most important.
Yeah, but yeah. You're right. I mean, like those top tiers get knocked off even more rapidly. So we have to get to power generation in this state. Solar's a mess. The way that they've tried to come in and do some things. Hopefully, we'll see some better planning going in, because that can be part of the solution, and should probably be part of the solution. But to get the amount of energy production that we need, there's not a good other option other than nuclear energy, right? The amount of power increase that we need. I mean, you'd have to to power a city, you have to pave over 3 to 4 times the size of a city with solar, right? If you're talking like remote areas and things like that, mobile things, solar's fantastic. Got it, good work. But you're never going to get the amount of power we need from solar or wind. Coal plants are going to get even more expensive, and that's if you're going to try to retrofit them or rebuild their aging equipment. If anybody out there has comments on other suggestions, I'd love to hear it. But I think definitely for me and most of the experts that I talk to, it's got to be nuclear power. That's what's going to carry us, not only into the future, but keep us from, taking a few steps backwards in our quality of life. So we'd mentioned that SMRs, so small modular reactors.
And I'm glad you went there, because I'm going to guess most people in their mind right now are thinking of Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, large cooling stacks and vents and everything else. But we are talking about Indiana's not trying to lead the way in revitalizing that. We're talking about the new wave of nuclear technology, right?
And so I mean, it's. I'll get to the new wave aspect of it, but yeah, I mean, it is definitely different than the traditional large scale mega nuclear power plants. And when people talk about Fukushima and the Chernobyl, it's not a nuclear issue. It's an engineering issue, right? And if you have good engineering, you don't have a problem. Gasoline is extremely combustible, right? We put them in cars all day and we drive around with zero concern about problems that we might have with gasoline because there's good engineering around automobiles and we don't have to worry about them combusting on us. Fukushima, you should have had your backup power generation in the disaster area. They should have put it further away, but that would cost more money. So they had it in their identified disaster zone. So when you need cooling to prevent meltdown situations and you don't have power because you wiped out your primary and secondary power source, you're in a lot of trouble, right? With Chernobyl, like literally the entire reactor design was wrong. The Soviet Union built one in Finland, and it was so alarming to Finland's nuclear scientists that they put up radiation detectors along their border with the Soviet Union because they were worried about, like, hey, there's going to be radiation leaks. That's how the world first identified what was going on at Chernobyl, is because Finland had already identified the problems with the reactor. That's probably way outside of the scope here to talk about how the rods.
Well, it kind of sets a background of a perception. Yeah. A lot of us have that perception of, yeah, we think nuclear energy is great. We want it. It's a lot more sustainable and efficient, but we feel that the risks are very high with the traditional model.
And with 3 Mile Island, right, it wasn't a disaster, right? All those, like, the safety mechanisms were all in place. It resulted in having a new high-level nuclear quality assurance program that is very robust and redundant that the NRC runs. So there were some lessons learned there, but all of those redundancies and safety mechanisms worked, right? For SMR, small modular reactors, it's a significantly easier type of reactor to maintain. Many of them don't even require external cooling, so they don't need external power. They've been around for a long time, even though people don't realize it, right? The small modular reactors, right? That scale of reactors we have had on Navy ships for like 60 to 70 years. Powering all of our submarines, all of our aircraft carriers. We've like never had a real incident with anything. We take them in depths of the ocean. We launch planes going off on bombing missions with it. We take them into combat zones, and they've been fine because the engineering is good. And if you look at like BWXT, which is one of or I think it's the premier company for building those reactor vessels, right? They're the ones that kind of have like a ground floor stake in a lot of the things that are going to be produced. So you've got literally decades, more than longer than you and I have been alive, of expertise of building a system that has had like zero like safety problems. So when it comes to like, oh, nuclear power, if people actually understand it, it's not scary, right? People should probably be more concerned about running around with highly combustible gasoline with them for half their day or however long they're commuting, but we don't, because we know it's safe. Maybe if you're driving like a 1980s Ford Pinto, you're going to be concerned about it because that was bad engineering. But just make sure you don't get rear-ended.
So we have solid engineering and modernization that can give us a small modular reactor that can solve some of the problems, probably at a lower scale. So maybe it's city, maybe it's regional. So we'd have to have a different footprint, but we would have that capability. But how do we tie that to public education, engagement, and still? There can still be a black swan or something, right? So is there anything that we could or should do to tie in our community and our first responders toward that implementation in the state?
Yeah, I mean, you always want to have pre-planned responses and training and preparation with all of your first responders. Right? If you have a new manufacturing company that comes in, and they're using chemicals, whatever, you need to have a chemical response detachment around, right? Whether it's with the police or fire or a joint agency thing, you need to have that capability because that's a concern in the area. If that's neglected, then you're asking for problems. you know, freak things can happen, even if they're like super far, like, you know, statistically impossible, but you got to prepare for them, right? And, you know, so like nuclear preparedness is not a bad, it's a good thing, right? Just in case one day, one thing, I don't know, a meteor hits it or something like that. Added benefit for the SMRs, right? They're smaller, contained, and they're going to be, you know, dispersed across the site, not a single area. So if something, you know, God forbid, an asteroid did hit them, or I guess meteor, asteroid's a whole different scale.
Oh, we have a whole nother one that's like,
right.
That's off topic,
Yeah.
but we got some weird
You know,
stuff going on now. Yeah.
You're talking about a much smaller problem, and, you know, you're going to have a standoff distance for, you know, any occupied dwellings around that. And then, you know, it's not going to be, it's a response. You know, you clean up a mess, just like if you have a semi truck topple over on the interstate. It's a mess. It's very inconvenient, and people have to go, you know, scrape whatever off the roads, hopefully not people, and then get everything moving back to normal. But with the SMRs, it's a lot smaller of a problem. It's more distributed. It's not really, and again, we have to have the response capability. That's not something that you can just ignore and go, everything's fine. I'll just stick my head in the sand. One of the things that I am somewhat concerned about is ensuring that expertise carries over, right? So you have some companies that have been running, you know, nuclear reactors for 50 years. Their security practices, very robust, very impressive. You know, they've went through several iterations of improvement. You know, I'm not worried about any of these companies that already have existing reactors. New companies, though, once they actually have the fissile material on site, like, I mean, any first generation plan, product, procedure, right? It's all going to have, there's always gaps. You know, look at the Cybertruck. There's some cool engineering and design in there. There's been a few issues, right? Any first, you know, first in class in the fleet, right? They learn a whole bunch of things of, oh, we didn't realize that this system was going to impact this system that way. You know, that way we're going to have to make some changes and adjustments. Security planning, you're like, oh man, I didn't realize that we have these camera blind spots because the sun comes over the hilltop at this angle and it blinds out these cameras, you know, every afternoon at 3:00 during, you know, the summer or solstice period. Yeah. So you learn those things. But if you have companies that are doing it the first time and they don't have people that understand the physical security behind it and have years of experience doing it, there's going to be gaps, right? And gaps are where people will find, you know, the opportunity to exploit. You know, if they see the gap, we know people want to get a hold of, you know, fissile material, right? We know that was a goal of ISIS and Al Qaeda, is to get a hold of fissile material and let it loose on the West, right? Dirty bombs actually not as real world concerning as scary. You know, I mean, it's much scarier than it is actually like harmful, but the chaos can do a lot of the harm in a terrorist scenario. Anyway, that's why it's terrorism. And so if you have gaps that are able to be identified, you have people that will exploit those gaps. You know, sometimes, you know, if you get up off the couch there and your wallet's sitting there when you get up, right? Oh, there's a target of opportunity, right? And depending on the person, are they going to go, oh, hey, Todd, yeah, here's your wallet. Where'd Todd go? Let's chase him around and find him and make sure he gets it. There's some people that look at and go, I bet I can get some cash out of that. I bet if I take one of those cards, he's not going to notice for a while. You know, so if you have gaps in security, even, you know, neutral or well-meaning people, they see that like, oh, I could walk off with some of this fissile material, and now I can try to sell it. Fortunately, the FBI is probably going to catch him like 99 times out of 100. Yeah. But you don't want to have those situations, and so that type of gap is where I do have some concerns, and I've been kicking people a little bit and making people maybe not so happy with me.
So where do you think that is where I'm hoping to go? Let's dial that in a little bit. Where do you think that responsibility lies and who's involved in that? Is that state? Is that federal? Is it the corporation? Is it the community? Is it all the above? Like how do we get to a solution of realizing that SMRs could be something really good for us, but we've got concerns we need to address because of how new it is and how we integrate it? And just, you know, just for what I'll just summarize so people understand is that in our state, we're a very traditional red state, right? But with that, there are some certain things we're finicky about. Solar doesn't do very good in Indiana. We've talked about that. Wind, yeah, maybe on the west side, but, you know, there's a lot of trade-off there as well. So the problem is going to be, and how do you adopt and convince the public of something they know. Hey, we know we need something. We know that this is cost beneficial for everybody, but we've got legacy concerns. Maybe it's just ingrained in what we are, but how do we ensure that responsibility is nested enough that we don't let something fall through the crack, that we, as soon as we get something started, something bad happens. And what I even think is that it doesn't even have to be a meltdown type of situation. I think it's something that is even just like prefab construction level. You have a catastrophic construction event, but it's on your site where there's nuclear potential, activity going on, and that could spell disaster for an entire new industry. So how do we fix that?
So I would say ultimately it's got to be the company that is driving that factor, right?
The
They have the
company.
most skin in the game there. And if the company is not doing it, they're gonna fail, right? Something's gonna happen, it's gonna collapse. And like you're saying, like one incident, even if there's not even fissile material on site, if you're like, oh, there was a crane collapse at this nuclear site, that's gonna alarm people. Public sentiment's going to shift, investors will pull, and then the project will collapse, right? I mean, we have nuclear sites here, or almost created
We
nuclear
almost
sites
had
here,
one. I think it was like
right?
a $3 billion loss to the state in the
It
late '70s.
it was massive.
Yeah.
Because they didn't do their due diligence, right? It was actually geological, right? The bedrock foundation wasn't stable enough, and so they kept dumping more money, and they're trying to fix it. But if you have your investors pull, like if you need $800 million in capital to get something going, and you lose 300 million, right? One of your big investors pull out because they're worried about public sentiment, well, then that project's not going to move forward, right? And if you don't have another investor online, and they're all timid about it because, like again, public sentiment is shifting on it, you've got people potentially, $500 million deep in investors that are left with a failed project. So they have to get after this. And like you're saying, we've got this, almost anger, right? Public outrage towards large scale solar plants in Indiana. I think, I mean, there's good reason behind it, but I don't think it's necessarily target because of solar, right? It's mostly the companies that came in, the way that they came in, they didn't engage with the community. They didn't care about community perception. They just tried to have their way and stomp on things. And when they didn't get their way, they tried to get the state to force legislation down. Like, you can't come in. Hoosiers are way too, we'll just say, rambunctious than to allow any company to just come in and step on them, right? You got to bring them on board. You have to bring local people on board. That there's a $1 billion Google data center that was supposed to go in on the southeast side of
$1
India.
billion.
$1 billion. And it got shut down because of the public pushback on it.
And that was just a grassroots movement, wasn't it?
It was. And the grassroots movement here are incredibly organized. There's a couple projects that were unacceptable. And, like, they're going to take like 100 million gallons of water a day from the Tippecanoe aquifer.
So that was a really good dive into our energy issue in the state, and it was really informative. But I wonder, what does that tie into other critical infrastructure within our state? And just to establish that kind of communication between us, what I'm thinking about is, what does it mean to our ability to transport, our ability to handle chemicals, which I think are important to our state, and then certainly things like healthcare. So there's a lot within the Department of Homeland Security and what's called CISA and the defined 16 categories. Are you seeing similarities in your concerns that you see with us in the energy sector? Do you see any similarities with the rest of our critical infrastructure in our state?
I'm glad you defined that, because I was going to say, whew, critical can go a broad category. So there are, like, safety wise, yeah, there's a ton of overlap, right? I mean, safety concerns tend to be, fairly like stable across different, organizations or facilities. As far as, massive gaps, we do have a looming crisis with rural healthcare as well. But that's more of a funding and population distribution problem. But there's some cool answers to that too. But as far as the security aspects go, you always have facility security concerns, right? somebody's going to want to, steal something. Somebody's going to get whatever information they can to steal identities and take money. They're going to want to go in and do harm to somebody in the building. And unfortunately, sometimes it's just random acts of I'm mad at society or whatever is going on in their head. And, they pick a target and go after it, right? And that's far too often, and increasingly so the case, right? So you have different ways that you have to address that. If you have, known targeted threats, like if you're at a bar, you have to worry about a couple of guys are going to, drink too much, get into it, right? There are expectations there. So you plan for that, right? You've got some bouncers to break it up. If somebody's getting a little bit too drunk or, agitated, you cut them off and you get them out of there, get them in a cab, send them home. Hospital's going to know like, oh, there's some people that are going to come in with, that are having a mental health crisis, right? You're going to have somebody that's going to come in, that's a shooting victim, and there is a criminal element that comes with it, right? So those are easier to plan for. But when you have that kind of random aspect of, oh, well, I'm going to go take it out on this at this hospital, oh, I was done wrong by whatever doctor, or I'm mad at my dad who's a doctor, and so I'm going to go take it out over here. Those are bigger challenges. And for some sick reasons, schools and churches have become targets. I mean, I guess it's just like going after innocents. I don't know. I can't wrap my head around why they become target. When you're talking about like Columbine, when we first started seeing like school shootings happening, okay, those were students that were upset and there was an inside problem. Horrible, but I think I can wrap my head around that a lot more than somebody coming from outside, like Uvalde, right? Like I'm going to go after a church I'm going to go after a school and I'm going to hurt little kids, or I'm going to go after a church and I'm going to hurt people like in the middle of it, like their worship services. Can't fully wrap my head around that.
I've tried for a long time. That is actually one of my strongest passions of what I want to do. Whiskey Arms doesn't really get into that so much, other than what we try to do to make people aware of what they can do to be better at defending themselves and others around them. That's certainly a part of our operator context that we're trying to bring out. But crisis response leader training was all about what you just brought up. And, I'd have a lot of close mentors and personal friends that are in this space. Survivors as parents from Sandy Hook and Platt High School in Pasadena and Parkland, and the worst of the worst. And then you see the grief that they carry, and it is heartbreaking. And then you try to figure out sociologically with something on the suspect's motivations. I try not even to go down that road because I don't know and I'm not even that close to it. I've seen my fair share of combat, but I cannot get that close and try to figure it out. But there's something we want to do about it, right? We want to prevent it and we want to prepare so that we can make sure that our response is as good as it can possibly be to save as many lives as possible. And you brought up a couple of things that are really important to go into the next question, which is I would love to know more about overall what you think about rural healthcare. And the reason is, it may not be the reason you're thinking about, but a lot of Indiana's rural. A lot of our U.S. is rural, unless you're on the eastern western seaboard or the Southwest or something. It's kind of rural. So if you think about your average response time to an incident, right? We can talk about that. I should go over that at least from what statistics are showing. Average incident of 911 successful call from a victim is 1 minute. Response time to that incident from law enforcement within a jurisdiction is 3 to 3.5 minutes. The ability to identify and neutralize a threat usually happens in another 4 minutes. So we're already about somewhere, and it varies a lot. I mean, it could be as fast as something as documented through Nashville, and all of that, flash the bang, and identify neutralizing the threat somewhere between 14 and 15 minutes. And it could be the opposite end of the spectrum, which is Uvalde, which was 74 minutes, and a lot of innocent lives lost. So that's only to the point of being able to get in and do something about it, where really most of the cycle of violence is done inside of 90 seconds. So what I really talk about is the time from possibly what we call PPD, the possibly preventable death, of when you can do something to save somebody's life, is about the 1.5 minute mark, up until the point that you can get them through what we call typically, I'm sure you're familiar with the golden hour.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to have a 75% or higher survivability rate from a gunshot wound, we know that we have to get them to urgent surgical care capabilities within 60 minutes of the time of they were wounded. The shot timer or countdown timer starts from the time that they're wounded. 90 seconds already gone by at the absolute earliest thing we can do with them. But more than likely, it's somewhere around 10, 12 to maybe 15 minutes. Now take away your time to transit from that location to the closest place for urgent surgical care from an OR that can do level 2 care. You're probably talking about a total time to respond, command, control, gain a handle the situation, do triage, do immediate trauma care, and do ground evacuation. I'm confident we have to do that in less than 25 minutes. How does that tie into our rural healthcare concerns and issues and our churches and our community centers and our schools?
So I've got probably like 8 hours of things that I want to say.
And I don't know why I'm laughing. This is such a serious topic, but we're laughing because we know it's a shitstorm,
right? And I mean, you have to, otherwise, we're going to sit here and just like, pour tears into our bourbon as we go, like, good God, things are horrible sometimes. So when early detection and delay of the actual bang, like that gives you the most amount of time, right? That helps you close that is directly connected with the fatality rate. That gives you more time for first responders to get there, to get victims out to either a stabilization center or those ORs. So having good access control, right? That is the most critical thing. And I don't know if we've talked about how much I do this before. That's one of the things I passionately do and volunteer my time for is school safety, emergency planning, active shooter responses, physical security assessments. In fact, was it Wednesday? Yeah, Wednesday. I stepped out of the Purdue Nuclear Engineering Summit to go Zoom in with a school in St. Louis and do their preparation with their teachers. So they do the dry run for their active shooter drill before they do their the drill with their students on Tuesday, and hopefully have it not traumatic for them, right? So having a thorough physical security assessment, understanding what your potential risks are, right? And he said, unfortunately for schools and churches, a potential risk that exists is somebody just showing up and wanting to do harm to innocents. There's other things you need to consider. If you're in a tornado zone, right, that's something you need in your emergency planning. If you're near a fault line, if you have old electrical power, things like that, right, you need to have obviously robust planning. And early detection for all of that is important, right? So you need to make sure that somebody's paying attention to weather conditions before you have church services, so they can be ready to get people down into the basement if there's a tornado. But you also need to make sure that you have somebody or some way of identifying outside of your facility, right? If you're just closing the doors and windows, focusing on the inside, I mean, that's good for communing with God, but it takes you out of the focus of the world around you. Which is sometimes the point, but unfortunately there's bad people out there. So having good procedures in place, like, hey, after the 10 minutes after services start, they lock the doors, right? They open from the inside, not the outside. Sorry if you're running late for church. Make sure your parishioners know. Schools, right? You need to have. I try not to call it a kill box because that makes teachers and educators uncomfortable. But a little lock-in area, right? One set of doors that require a buzzer, an administrative, personnel. You get the camera, you show your ID, you state your purpose, they let you in. Now you're in that foyer area, and you can talk to the person at the window maybe, but you can't get into the school. Right?
A vestibule type of security system of inner to outer with an access control verification.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every school needs that. Every school should have that. All of their other doors, or maybe if it's a really big school, maybe you have 2 entrance points like that or whatever. But your entrance points need to be controlled like that. You also need to make sure that you teach everybody all the doors are shut, right? You're not propping a door open to go out for a smoke break. So there's discipline and everything that goes into that.
And if I could, I would say that I think that's a big part of what my company does do on CRLT is awareness and education. The actual opportunity for smuggling or insertion or attack through the main area of access control it's actually greater that it won't be that because of that being a perceived strong point. It is much easier to look at the vulnerability of the lack of security by propping open with a brick, a work order that's not been completed on a lock, or a
Roof
student thinking that,
access.
oh, I'm just helping out a kid because he's coming in with an art project and folded up on the inside of his art project is an assault rifle. Those are the kind of things that have to be done. And I think we really have to balance. Certainly, we want 100% access control. Nobody should get into or out of a critical site like a healthcare or a church or a hospital or a school. That should be 100% accountability at all times for any access point. But I think some of our challenge, and it's not Indiana specific, it's everywhere, is that we're not doing a very good job of the awareness piece of that to the training discipline piece of that.
And the buy-in, right? People have to buy in. They like teachers, students, they have to understand like, oh, if I'm propping doors open or if I'm, letting people in, just, being the nice Midwestern person, let me hold the door for you. And they just scurry on like that. You are creating a risk of harm to, your peers, to your students, to your friends. Right. And you have to get that across. And then, if it's, like, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to open the door. Okay, that's one thing. But if they understand the reasoning behind it, oh, you don't hold the door open for somebody, despite your Midwestern upbringing, because of these threats, yeah, right? Because of the harm that it could do to the people that you care about, right? So they have to understand the why to get the buy-in, and that has a significant impact on like compliance with those rules.
Why aren't we doing better at it?
Because it's a lot of work, right? And I mean, people are already overtaxed with everything. Teachers are staying after school, coming in beforehand. Administrators are doing 8 different jobs because they're not staffed. And unfortunately, the thing that is what is it? The squeaky wheel gets the grease, or the wolf closest to the door. Right? They're looking at all the other things that they have to do, and that's when you see these vulnerabilities pile up, like the things that are getting neglected. And the problem is people that want to do harm can also see those vulnerabilities piling up, and they see those. Give me any facility, I could sit out, maybe I'll get identified and security will come over and be like, what are you doing? But I can watch the facility, I can watch the comings and goings, I can find the weak point. And then all it is like, if you know the pattern of life, it's just a matter of resource and preparation.
So that, we're getting toward the end of our time, but I got 2 last questions for you. And one of that is pertinent to this right here is, what would you say is something we could do at either the community level or the state level to reverse this trend to ensure greater security and preparedness for the things we think are really important, like our critical infrastructure, our schools, our churches, our healthcare, our major energy production capabilities? What do we got to do to make something better?
So other than obviously the actually caring about people in the community and building all that, which goes into a whole nother realm of reducing the possible perpetrators, and then you also have the outside actors. Again, people understanding the risks, having whatever rules, regulations, forcing function in place that churches, you're responsible for the people inside. We need to make sure that you are meeting XYZ, right? Building code, you have to have a fire alarm, right? We have to understand security in the same way.
So a standardization of language, terminology, and standards in and of itself.
Right.
And we're not communicating that well at the community level.
And people don't understand the risks that are right around them. So I did a security assessment of a preschool one time, and they had these huge glass windows right there, and on the other side there's like these lockers for the kids. And so they're all sitting there getting ready and getting their coats on or trying to figure out how to tie their shoes and everything. And they're right by these huge glass windows. I'm like, you have got to do something about this. And they're like, oh, it lets in all the sunlight and everything. I was like, first of all, people can see all these kids for a prolonged period of time. there's a target of opportunity there. We know people will go after children.
Yeah.
Also, you've got landscapers out here. God forbid they hit, they're on the riding motor and they hit a rock and the rock hits the window. Now you have shattering glass coming at them. And that's when they were like, oh, they accepted that was a real problem and not somebody wanting to do harm to the children. But whatever, I got my point across. Right? Things like ballistic film. Ballistic film can do an amazing job. It holds all the glass together. It prevents like the penetration that you see with a lot of projectiles, whether they, be shrapnel, firearms, rocks from a lawnmower, right? It's relatively inexpensive and it's amazingly functional. And if you get tinted, right, you can see out and you get all the beautiful sign, and it's just it's mirrored on the other side. And so that provides privacy and safety for everybody on the other side.
I even think that sometimes when we look at civil unrest, which is of increasing likelihood as how divisive we've become in our society, that businesses in and of themselves in likely areas of protest would want to consider something like that, regardless of what they're doing when they're not there, or when they are there, but when they're not. So we've hit a lot of things, and I really am hopeful that we are going to create more awareness, education, training, and preparedness and preparation through these kind of discussions. We haven't talked much about you and and I don't want to call it ambition because, I've gotten to know you really well. And I don't get a chance to talk to potential candidates very often. I'll be quite honest with that. But you're so well informed. You really understand from firsthand experiences and paying attention to things. You're not a one paragraph deep potential candidate, right? So you are doing your homework and you have a lot of experience and leadership to back that up. So at the end of this, with what we've talked about, what is important to you as you're running for Indiana for District 4, right?
Yeah.
What are the things that are important to you, and what would you like to convey as an opportunity right now? What would you like to say to people that need to consider if they would vote for you or not?
So I'd say the biggest thing is I think there are people that, get into government to do good, and there are those that get in to do good for themselves. And I think far too often there's the people that are trying to do good for themselves. Personally, I would love to enjoy my military retirement on my 12-acre hobby farm with my 4,000 square foot barn that is my everything workshop, and my wife and my children and my, like 4 of my siblings live in the same town. Like, it is amazing. Like that's my preference. But there's also a responsibility, right? I mean, I could sit there and watch things go bad and be like, well, my life is good. That sucks for them. But there's a moral responsibility, especially if you have the ability to act, right? And I've been blessed and very fortunate to have a incredible military career that's given me, real world, learning opportunities, hands-on experience, education, at Purdue, working with some of the most informed people in a bunch of different fields. And so I'm sitting back last year, or I'm mostly laid up waiting to get my spinal surgery. And I'm like, I don't have the right not to go do something, right? Like, if you see a toddler running towards the road, you go stop that toddler, right? Doesn't matter if you have anything to do with that child or not. And if you don't, and something happens to that kid, you have moral culpability, and it's going to sit on your soul, or at least it should. And so, despite the fact that I would love to stay home and enjoy my happy life, I don't think I have the moral right to stay home and do it. So I decided I'm going to run for office. My biggest thing, so coming at it twofold, both at the federal level of we see these pretty aggressive swings of the pendulum, and I'm not sure how resilient our democratic institutions are going to be, after another couple swings of the pendulum, right? There needs to be a dampening factor, and that's where constitutional Republicans come in, where we need to get back to what the Constitution says, checks and balances, establish the way the founding fathers say it's supposed to be, and our institutions are much more resilient then. Locally, I started doing the local focus after I was like, hey, we've got this federal problem, right? I'm not going to step into a situation where I'm supposed to be responsible for people, to represent people, and not do that. I've got my little hobby farm, but I'm not a farmer, right? I don't know what it's like to have a family farm or even industrial scale farm and to rely on commodities markets. So I've spent a lot of the last 5 months learning about commodity markets, global commodity markets. I spent a ton of time with the Farm Bureau, talking to their experts, going to their critical issue summits, talking to farmers out in the community. I've spent a lot of time talking to rural healthcare issues, both the nurses and the staff, people in the waiting rooms, CEOs of rural hospitals that are at jeopardy of like closing down. We have 7 hospitals in our district that are at risk of shutting down in 3 years. Like they're already spending in the red.
And they may be only the ones in that county.
Yeah, some of them, they're the only hospital there across 2 counties.
Yeah.
Right.
That's not good at all.
It's not. And we have EMS locations that are shutting down because, grants have disappeared. Well, if you have to get an hour and a half just for the ambulance to get there, grandpa has a heart attack, an hour and a half, grandpa's probably not already making it. And that's before you have somebody there helping them. It's another, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours to a hospital. It's going to be able to do something. So I've gotten involved in a lot more things than I ever thought I would. Figuring out how to coordinate EMS stations at township fire departments, right? So it saves on their overhead and it's a viable business opportunity while it's also supporting a little bit of income for the volunteer firefighters so they can get their new equipment, right? And there's so many incredible and amazing solutions out there. When you start talking to people and you see all the problems and you can connect the dots, and it's amazing, right? It's very energizing. And despite as busy as I am running around to just different groups and meetings and events, all week, every week, it's energizing when you have you're able to come up with those solutions and fix those problems. And so the last big thing, we're starting to do our veterans a disservice, right? And that's obviously something that's very near to my heart. I'm a veteran myself. All of the sailors that I've had that have worked for me that have gotten out of the Navy, that I have had responsibility for them while they're in harm's way. They still mean something to me. I'm not going to let their situations just get brushed under the rug. You had a Washington Post piece that seemed like a hit piece on veterans' disability benefits, and all it talked about was, oh, there's some people that abuse the system. Yeah, there's some people that abuse every system, but when you use that as an excuse to cut the support, you're hurting a lot of people that put themselves out there physically and mentally for the well-being of our country, right? If we don't keep those promises, we're not going to have people that are willing to do that. That's not a choice our country gets to make, is go, veterans are too costly to care about. We might have destroyed their body. We might have given them some serious PTSD that they're dealing with, but I don't know, this other guy was faking it, so I need to cut all this money. And you had this whole promise where we're not going to cut veterans benefits, but they cut all the support staff. So now you don't have access to the veterans benefits, and that's something I'm going to literally fight to the death for if necessary. I'm not going to let that go. No.
That's very noble.
I mean,
it ties in. I mean, you've had a life of service, so thank you on that. Appreciate it.
I thank you. I mean, again, I think it's a moral responsibility to country and to community. And if we don't have people that are standing up for it, we're in bigger trouble than I even think.
So I will say this, in closing it out, is that I think across the discussion, there is a theme here that regardless if we're talking about a specific energy fix or critical infrastructure across the board, or what we want to do with churches and schools and our communities and rural healthcare, there's a tie-in here that kind of binds it all together. And it's what we started with, which is the problems that come up are going to be dealt with by the people who are on the ground. We might get some help, we might not, but we better be prepared to handle as much as we possibly can, because we don't know what's going to come for us. The further we are away from a centralized urban location, the harder it's going to be. And then at the end, they're going to clean their hands, wipe off the tables, pack everything up and leave, and we're still stuck with whatever's in the aftermath. Unless we want to shut down because the trauma's so bad or the economic situation's so bad, we become a ghost town. If we really want that community to survive, we have to be resilient. We have to bring back to our communities the ability to do things like leadership, civic duty, and resilience, and really just compassion for each other. And I think you kind of expressed that regardless of your political affiliation. You talked about, it doesn't matter. What you talked about is what's core to every person that is a part of our society. So I commend you for that. I mean, for me, you have my vote. There's no doubt
Appreciate
about
that.
but absolutely, it's been a joy and pleasure talking with you, and wish you the best of luck. And cheers to you, my friend.
And to you and your work.
Take care.